When I was 18 years old, I got on a bus, and I was taking the bus into downtown San Francisco to go attend my first gay pride parade. And San Francisco was this gay mecca that was just over the bridge from where I grew up. But from my perspective as an isolated teenager in the suburbs, it may as well have been Mars. Let me just take you back to where we are. The year is 1983. We had no internet. There were this is what's happening. It's the drums. There was no internet. There were no gay people on television. There were no gay politicians. There was no It Gets Better project. And I had somehow managed to make it to the age of 18 without ever meeting a single other gay person. I wasn't out in high school. You didn't come out in high school. You just, you wandered the halls and you saw some people that you thought might be like you, but you kind of avoided each other's eye contact, and you did your 4 years, and you grew up, and you figured, I'm going to get out of high school, I'm going to go meet people, I'm going to start living my life. So that Sunday afternoon, a few weeks after I graduated, I wanted to start living my life. So I took this bus in alone to see this parade. And when I arrived, the parade was in full swing, and I was immediately completely overwhelmed because there were so many people there, and they were all older than me, and they all seemed to know each other. And I had no clue how to connect with a single one of them. So I stood there for about 3 hours watching the parade, and I realized after a few hours that I was actually beginning to feel more profoundly alone after having gone there than I did when I first showed up. So I turned around and got on the bus and went back home, and on the way home I kind of consoled myself with the idea that in a few months I'll go to college, and surely at Bard College in upstate New York I will meet some other gay people my age. But I didn't in an entire year. So at the end of my freshman year, I started looking around, and I ended up applying for an internship at the National Gay Task Force in Manhattan. And I was an enthusiastic interviewee, and they hired me. And in June I started, and a few weeks later I went to my second gay pride parade, and it was a totally different experience because I sort of felt like I had a place there. And it was a good feeling, and I wanted to keep that feeling going. So at the end of the summer I decided to drop out of college and keep working at the task force. And by this time, I was out to my immediate family and my friends, but they were all individually and collectively horrified by this idea. And the response was generally, you got into a really good school. Why the hell are you throwing away your education? And I didn't think of it that way, and I let them know this in long, earnest letters that I wrote to all of them about my new life's direction and purpose. And it was sort of like, I'm not going to waste my youth in some remote ivory tower. I'm gonna go out there and change the world. So I was 19 years old. I had established myself as an adult pretty much overnight, and I had spent so many years thinking about what it was going to be like to be a grown-up and longing for it and waiting for it, and now it was suddenly here, and it was a little anticlimactic, but it was still, I just really wanted to get involved. So, like I said, this was 84, and by this time I was certainly aware of AIDS, and I'd heard of it first in 1981, and then at that point it was still known as a rare cancer among homosexual men, so it didn't even have a name. And it was big news in the Bay Area where I grew up, and 3 years later, it was a pandemic, so it was big news everywhere. And it had a name. And still, at that point, it was still this abstract thing happening to other people somewhere else. And I didn't really see it in my daily life growing up, and I didn't see it at either of those parades. The task force staff that I worked on was really small. We were maybe 10 people total, but we had tons of volunteers. We had dozens of people coming in and out of the office. And one day I was sitting at my desk working, and one of the volunteers walked by, and the first thing I noticed about him was how slowly he was walking. And he was also dressed completely inappropriately for the day. It was it was one of these blazing hot New York late summer days, and he was wearing long pants and a long sleeve shirt. And I looked over the collar of the back of his shirt, and I could see finely etched every single vertebra in his neck. And then I noticed on his hands he had this blanket of purple lesions. And after he left, one of my colleagues showed me a picture, and it was of this beautiful young man, muscled and tan, standing in a polo shirt that was way too tight. And I never would have recognized him. And then we had another volunteer who was probably in his late 50s, and he just lost his brother to AIDS, and now he was losing all of his friends. And when I first started working there, he came in a lot to volunteer, and then he suddenly disappeared. And somebody told me that they had heard that either out of grief or some sense of inevitability or fatalism, he'd gone out and deliberately exposed himself to HIV, and now he was sick too. And I started seeing men like this all the time until I didn't see them anymore. And so in a way, I look back on that, and I think 1984 might have been the best year to become a gay activist, or it might have become the worst year to become a gay activist. Because I had gotten on a bus in suburbia to go to a party, and I'd gotten off in the middle of a war zone, and I felt like I'd auditioned for the role of activist, and I'd won it, but all the people I was working with were fighting a real war, whereas I was just like playing a soldier in a war movie. So by this time, a year had passed. It was 1985, and in the spring of that year, right after my 20th birthday, I gave notice, and I told them that I needed to go back to school. But clearly, in the previous year, I'd already gotten an education. Thanks.